The man had barely settled into his seat in first class when the whispers began. A woman 2 rows behind leaned forward, her voice sharp, slicing through the quiet cabin. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong section." He turned slowly, his eyes calm but steady, meeting hers without a single word. The flight attendant arrived moments later, clipboard in hand, her polite smile already rehearsed. "Sir, this section is reserved for premium passengers. I'll need to see your boarding pass again." Around him, the air thickened with unspoken assumptions. Passengers shifted in their seats, some curious, others quietly complicit. It was not the first time he had been asked to prove he belonged, but today, something in his stillness made the entire plane feel like a stage. Everyone watched, waiting for him to stumble, to apologize, to shrink. He did none of those things. Instead, he placed the ticket back in the attendant's hand with deliberate calm. The ink was undeniable. Seat 1A. Paid in full, yet the moment hung suspended, the quiet storm of bias pressing against him. And no one, not even the woman who had challenged him, knew the truth that was about to land like thunder. He was not simply another man boarding a plane. His name was Malcolm Hayes, and his story began decades earlier in a neighborhood where dreams of flying felt almost impossible. His mother cleaned houses near the airport, and he would press his small hands against the chain-link fence, watching the aircraft roar overhead. While others told him to be realistic, Malcolm studied, worked double shifts, and carried books that weighed more than his young frame should bear. Every scholarship, every late-night exam, every rejection letter he turned into fuel. He entered the aviation industry not through the front doors of privilege, but through the back corridors of persistence. But the system was never neutral. Meetings where his ideas were dismissed until repeated by someone else. Interviews where he was told he lacked the right image. Even as he climbed through the ranks, Malcolm faced a quieter war. The coded questions, the subtle doubts, the endless proving. What they did not see was how these very obstacles sharpened him, crafting a man who carried resilience like an invisible shield. So, when that passenger assumed he did not belong in first class, it was not an isolated insult. It was the echo of a lifetime of barriers, and what came next would be his answer to all of them. The flight attendant lingered, boarding pass in hand, eyes darting between the ticket and Malcolm's steady face. Behind her, the woman who had sparked it all crossed her arms with a smug certainty that he would soon be escorted back to coach. Malcolm could feel the heat of the entire cabin pressing against him, strangers who were not just watching but silently judging whether he belonged. In that moment, he had 2 choices. He could do what many had been conditioned to do, lower his voice, surrender his dignity, and make himself small to avoid escalation. Or he could stand firm, not with anger, but with a quiet defiance that came from years of being underestimated. His heart tightened. He remembered being told as a boy that silence was often safer. Yet he also remembered his mother's words. "Son, one day you won't just ride the plane, you'll run it." The fork was clear. Retreat into invisibility, or step into visibility with the weight of his truth. The entire cabin waited. Even the engines outside seemed to hold their breath. Malcolm inhaled deeply. A single action, he knew, could flip the entire outcome. Malcolm leaned back in his seat, posture relaxed, as though the turbulence of accusation had not touched him. He looked at the attendant, his tone calm but edged with gravity. "Check again. Seat 1A. Hayes." She glanced at the ticket, then at her manifest, her smile faltering for the first time. Something did not add up, but she hesitated to apologize in front of so many eyes. The woman behind him whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "They always try to sneak in." The words hung in the cabin like a poisoned dart. Malcolm did not flinch. What no one on that plane realized was that the man they doubted had designed the very customer experience protocols the airline prided itself on. He knew the seating system better than the staff themselves. More than that, his name carried weight in boardrooms far above their pay grade, weight he never used for personal defense. Until moments like this. He pulled out a sleek, leather-bound folder from his briefcase, its insignia embossed with the airline's crest. No one noticed it at first, but when the attendant's eyes landed on it, her breath caught. She did not know it yet, but she was standing before the architect of her own employer's future. The attendant's hesitation only seemed to embolden the woman behind him. "See? He should just move before this gets ugly," she muttered, loud, enough for the rows around them to hear. A ripple of uneasy laughter spread, the kind that hides prejudice behind nervous humor. Malcolm sat still, but inside he felt the old weight pressing down. Decades of being forced to prove, explain, defend. The attendant, caught between protocol and perception, finally leaned in with a hushed firmness. "Sir, if you cannot cooperate, I may have to call security to escort you off the plane." That was the moment. The words sliced deeper than intended. To the watching crowd, the image was already forming. A black man refusing to comply, a threat to order, a disruption to their comfort. The murmur grew. Heads shook. Even passengers who should have known better avoided his eyes, unwilling to step into the storm. Malcolm felt the sting of humiliation, not for himself alone, but for every time bias had masqueraded as procedure. This was the breaking point. Not just for his pride, but for the very patience that had carried him through years of silent endurance. And in that silence, a different kind of plan began to form. Malcolm closed his eyes for a brief moment, centering himself as the attendant's words echoed. He could feel the cabin's gaze pressing in, not unlike the boardrooms where he had once been the only black man at the table. Years ago, he would have swallowed the insult, reasoning that silence was the price of progress, but silence had never changed a system, only delayed its reckoning. He opened his eyes, steady and unshaken, and a different resolve crystallized. He reached for his phone, not to record the moment in anger, but to draft a single message. His fingers moved with precision. A text to the airline's chief operating officer, a colleague and longtime ally. The message was short, deliberate, undeniable. On board, Flight 227. Situation developing. Cabin crew questioning whether I belong. In my own seat. Will address directly, if not resolved. This was not a threat, but a decision. A choice to reveal what had been hidden. His authority, his influence, his rightful place. He tucked the phone away, lifted his gaze, and allowed a faint smile to return. The old strategy of survival had ended. A new one had just begun, the we. Attendant returned, visibly unsettled now, but still attempting authority. "Sir, please understand, I have procedures to follow." Malcolm nodded once, neither combative nor submissive. His composure unsettled her more than anger ever could. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply allowed the silence to do its work, the kind of silence that makes people second-guess their assumptions. Minutes passed. The cabin buzzed with speculation. Malcolm opened his folder and began reviewing documents marked for a board meeting. In London, the very reason for his travel. Graphs, projections, and strategy notes sprawled across the pages, though to the untrained eye it looked like any executive's paperwork. The attendant caught glimpses of the crest again, her frown deepening. Something was wrong with the picture she had painted of him. Then a vibration in his pocket. His colleague had replied, "Noted. Handle with grace. Your call, Malcolm." The power in those words was subtle but immense. It reminded him that real authority did not need to be shouted. It only needed to be revealed at the right time. He straightened in his seat, readying himself. The storm was building toward its inevitable shift. The intercom crackled and the captain's voice filled the cabin. Calm, assured, unshaken. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 227. This evening, we're privileged to have our company's Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Malcolm Hayes, traveling with us in seat 1A. Please join me in extending him the courtesy and respect he deserves." The cabin froze. The woman who had accused him shrank back into her seat, her arms no longer crossed but folded defensively across her chest. The attendant's face flushed red, the clipboard trembling in her hands. Passengers who had judged him moments earlier now shifted uneasily, realizing the man they had doubted was the one steering the very future of the airline. Malcolm did not gloat. He did not smirk. He simply inclined his head in acknowledgement, his calm presence heavier than any outburst could have been. The truth had landed with more force than any argument. Bias had been exposed, not by shouting, but by an undeniable fact. A system that had tried to belittle him now found itself humbled before the quiet gravity of his authority. And yet, this was not the end. The aftermath of that moment would echo far beyond a single flight. The announcement lingered in the air long after the captain released the intercom. A strange quiet settled over the cabin, the kind of silence that follows a mirror being held up to those who had looked without truly seeing. The woman who had accused him kept her gaze fixed on the seatback in front of her, her earlier confidence drained into a hollow shame. The attendant, visibly shaken, returned with an apology she could barely form. "Mr. Hayes, I did not realize." Her words faltered, but Malcolm met her with a calm nod, not to absolve her, but to remind her of the lesson she would carry long after the flight touched down. The passengers, too, shifted in their seats. Some avoided eye contact, others stared with a kind of reverence. The truth had forced them to confront how quickly assumptions become judgment, how easily dignity is denied. Malcolm opened his folder once more, this time not as a shield, but as a symbol, the work of leadership continuing even when dignity is challenged. What had begun as humiliation had become transformation. But the deeper question was not about Malcolm alone. It was about everyone watching. Would they change? Would the system? Or would this be just another moment forgotten at 30,000 feet? When the plane landed hours later, passengers filed out quietly, some offering Malcolm polite nods they had withheld earlier. The woman who had accused him slipped away quickly, carrying the weight of her own reflection. The attendant approached once more, her voice softer this time. "I'll remember this, sir." And Malcolm, steady as ever, simply replied, "That's the point." What happened on Flight 227 was not about one seat, one class, or one title. It was about the unseen battles many fight daily, battles against assumption, bias, and the quiet erosion of dignity. Malcolm's power did not lie in his title as CEO. It lay in his choice to hold steady, to reveal truth with patience instead of fury, to transform humiliation into a mirror for everyone watching. Here's what that moment teaches us. A single action, done with calm clarity, can flip the entire outcome, not just for ourselves, but for the system around us. And each of us, in our own way, will face moments when the world questions our place. In those moments, the challenge is simple yet profound. Will you shrink or will you stand? If this story resonated with your values, like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that dignity, justice, and resilience are not just ideas. They are actions, and actions change everything.